It's probably one of the number one questions I get being a mom of 8 kids. And that question is, what on earth are y'all doing about college? And I can tell you, with 8 different kids, 8 different learning styles, 8 different ideas about what the kids want when it comes to their careers and all of the rest, college has been a big topic of conversation around here. Well, there is a university that I want you to know about because it just hits so many of the things that are really important when it comes to considering your kid's college education. George Fox University, it's the #1 private school in Oregon. It's a Christian university. It's located in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. And what's so great is in addition to a top-notch education, students have the opportunity to grow and deepen their faith, and they can learn in this really pivotal time in their lives who God made them to be. I mean, let's face it, we need more people coming out of our universities who know how to be leaders and how to be leaders with character. And George Fox University offers more than 60 academic majors. And that includes a nationally recognized engineering program, a nursing program. It allows your student to pursue their passions and prepare for the calling that God has for them. And let's not forget about fun when it comes to college. George Fox University students have a great student life. There are weekly campus events, there's chapel, there's service opportunities. There are 23 NCAA Division III athletic teams. Here's something that is important to me. There's a study abroad opportunity. So if your student wants to go and experience life somewhere else for a semester, they can do that. There's outdoor recreation because, of course, we're talking about Oregon, so gorgeous. George Fox University could be just the perfect fit for your student as you are looking into college, career, and all that goes beyond. George Fox University, where your student will learn and thrive in the center of it all.
Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Hey friend, I'm Julie Lyles Carr. You're listening to the AllMomDoes podcast, part of the Purposely Podcast Network. I wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up. The next 2 episodes are probably going to be ones that you want to listen to with the headphones on. We are talking marriage. I recently spoke to a young moms group and we recorded that session. And I talked about what I call the marriage big 6, that in my time, both as somebody who's been married for 35 plus years and also in my time in women's ministry, the different things that I've seen in those journeys that can really send our relationships sideways, and what we can do to be intentional to protect our marriages, to grow our marriages. It's not just about staying together, it's about getting better, right? And so I want to encourage you to take a listen today to this episode, and then I talked for a while, so we've split it into 2 episodes. This is going to be part 1. I'm going to talk about 2 of the factors we need to be on guard on when it comes to our marriages. And then you'll hear the remaining 4 of the Marriage Big 6 in episode 2. This is sort of like a little mini series. And so be sure and take a listen to this one. Then when the next episode comes out, you'll get the remainder. But again, I speak pretty frankly, pretty bluntly about some stuff. And so I just wanted you to have the chance to maybe put on those headphones. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for letting me speak into this space. And hey, here's the disclaimer. I in no way say that my marriage has been any kind of perfection, but I've been married for a while now to my guy, and we've had some kids, we've lived some life, we have had some experiences. And so it's my hope that I can just put an arm around your shoulders, say, hey, you know what? Marriage can be awesome. Marriage can be hard. There can be seasons. Here are some things to think about. Here are some resources. And a quick note, this was recorded during these sessions, and so the audio might not be exactly what you're used to hearing when it comes to how you're typically getting podcast episodes from me that happen in studio. So just be aware of that. I know that our sound engineer can do all kinds of amazing things to make the audio sound good, but if it sounds a little bit different, it's because this was recorded live in a room with little kids and babies sometimes because it's to a young moms group. So just be aware of that. And again, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for listening.
So there's this pitch to a voice when you're a mom that I'm sure you're familiar with, and I heard it. I was downstairs because, at some point in your parenting career, it's really important that you buy a ramshackle old colonial that you're going to turn into your dream home, right? That's really important. And so I was downstairs, I'm sure, fixing something, ripping a wall out. I don't know exactly what was happening, but upstairs, I heard that pitch of voice that you hear before all heck is about to break loose with a couple of your kids. And so I could hear muffled through the door, which we all know is generally followed by some kind of physical altercation, some kind of throwing of things, etc. And because I am such a ninja mom, I was on top of it. I was up the stairs because I knew I could intervene and find out exactly what was going on practically as it was happening. So I get up to the door where my two oldest daughters are playing. They were about 5 and 7 at the time. And now it's really hitting a fever pitch because of it. And I just about get ready to bust through the door and give speech 42AB paragraph 4, which is, do you know how fortunate you are to have a sibling? Do you understand that I never had sisters and you have sisters, and here you are squandering your time fighting with one another, and you're going to go over here and you're going to go over there, and nobody's going to get to watch whatever Disney whatever is coming up at 3 p.m. today because you don't value the value of having a sister. And I got ready to deliver that speech right as my hand was on the door. And then I heard this line, I never thought my Barbie wedding would turn out this way. And I opened the door to find that my girls, in fact, were not fighting. Their Barbies were responding to the fact that they had set up a beautiful Barbie wedding. Everyone was invited, including, and I know this is controversial, but G.I. Joe and some other Transformer figurines. I know this mixing of genres is a little problematic, but they had put together this beautiful wedding, and then you'll never believe it, an F5 tornado blew through. And then our whale from our Jonah and the Whale set came through, and he really decimated some things. And there was Barbie furniture and Barbie clothing and Barbie everything all over the place because they had decided to throw a Barbie wedding that included every kind of action movie peril that could ever happen. And as I stood there and took in the Barbie wedding carnage, my speech now tucked in my back pocket because it wasn't going to be necessary, I thought, man, that is metaphorical for a lot of us when it comes to marriage. We never thought our wedding/marriage/whatever would turn out that way. We have seasons that go just as we planned. And then we have seasons in which everything, including G.I. Joe, the whale from the Jonah set, and everything else seems to come at us and change what our relationship was, what we thought it was gonna be, where we thought it was gonna be headed. And sometimes it's not even the Jonah whale or an F5 tornado. It's just marriage and living alongside another human. It's interesting to me that in the Word of God, in Hebrews 3 and verse 4, in this book that is all about clouds of witnesses and theology and all kinds of things, the writer says marriage should be honored by all. Marriage should be honored by all. We are living in times in which, some people say they believe in marriage, some people say they don't believe in marriage. I find from an anthropological standpoint, that's kind of hilarious because for one reason or another, inside faith systems, outside faith systems, we live in a world in which we organize ourselves by marriage. We just do. There's something in the human condition, whether we believe in God or we don't, whether we think that marriage is a religious institution or we don't. We tend in our societies to say, I'm picking you, you're picking me. We're going to build something outside of ourselves. We are in a unique time in history in that marriage has never meant more in many ways. Throughout our history as humans, we've had times that people marry to get property. They've married for political alliance. They have married in order to gain a certain level of power with another family that is in power. And yes, sometimes people even married for love. But I love what Esther Perel, who's a leading marriage expert today, talks about when she says that never in our history as humans have we seen both the increase of possibilities in what marriage can be, and at the same time, the pressures put on marriage today because of all the things that we think it can be. Now, I've been married for over 35 years to the cutest guy you've ever seen. Is that fair to say, Jewel? He's a cutie. I was like, Lord, I just want someone who kind of looks like a little bit taller Tom Cruise. And God said, okay, boom. And I got Mike Carr out of the deal. The first time that I met him, the first time that I saw him and started getting to know him when we were at Abilene Christian University, it was like, he is the finest thing I've ever seen, which was interesting because back in the day, that was the one filter you needed. Who's the cutest guy you can find? And then there's like this thing called life that happens all around that. And you discover, well, I hope there's some backbone of character. I hope there's some other things that have also been onboarded in being the cutest guy. And, that in that sense, particularly for those of us who walk in a certain faith perspective, we think we know as long as we got Jesus and I think you're cute, we're good. And yet, God's word being what it is, that marriage should be honored by all. Do we not think there were people back in this time frame who mom and dad had put that marriage together so that we could get that plot of land over there? Don't we know that through the years, not always has marriage been a romance connection? And yet somehow, even with all the things that bring people together, we're reminded that marriage should be honored by all. There's a foundational backbone to our society, to our cultures, about publicly saying, I belong to you, you belong to me. We are building something together. Now, I was a women's pastor for many years, and I can tell you that even though I have a book on parenting and I have a lot of other things and content out there that are around, both of my podcasts are on parenting for the most part. One's called AllMomDoes, one's called God on the Go. In all of that, the topic I dealt with most frequently when women would come to me would be about their marriages. You probably have seen some stats that say, well, divorce rates are coming down a little bit, but that's not exactly the right math. What it is that people are getting married less frequently. Marriage is down. So when fewer people are getting married, you have fewer divorces, which depending on one way you do the math might make it look like divorce is dropping. But really what it is that marriage rates have dropped in our culture today. We aren't making a lot of progress when it comes to keeping marriages not just together, but healthy. And oftentimes I think we fail people because we get so focused on keeping marriages together that we don't focus on making them better. And it's the better part that actually is the witness and the thing that's good for our kids and the thing that really honors. Now, I love also what Esther Perel says, that in our culture today, you will likely be in 3 or 4 different marriages, sometimes to the same person. And I would say that my husband and I had had at least 3 or 4 marriages, if not 10 or 16. I don't know. It just depends on what day you call me, because to which iteration of marriage that we're on. I don't say any of that to be a downer. I say that to say, whatever season of marriage you're in, I want you to be encouraged that there is a great possibility that you can have an even better marriage in 5 years and an even better one in 10 years. And it might even be to the same person when we equip ourselves. Now, I want to be very clear. In my time working so intensely with a lot of women, there were times where the game just had to be called. I'm not here to judge anybody on what their marital history has been and where they've landed and what has happened. What I am here to say is, yeah, there's value in staying together, but there's greater value in getting better at this thing. Because what I find is that when things aren't going great in my marriage, it colors everything. I can have an issue with one of my kids. I can have an issue at work. I can have something going on in an extended family, and it can bother me. It can be big. It can feel really big. But man, when Mike and I get sideways, it's kind of everything. I mean, it feels so foundational when things are sideways. And so when we can get to a place that we're better, not just together, that also can change everything. Now, I want to talk about the big 6 things that I typically saw in my tenure and the phone calls I still get to this day from people who are struggling. And this is not exhaustive. You're going to be like, yeah, but in my case, I've got this going on. Or my best girlfriend, she has this going on, and that's not on your list. I understand that. Marriages can be very individual. They can have unique complexions. But at the same time, there's some things that I think a lot of us grapple with. That if we get some tools and we get some equipping and we get the sense that we're not the only ones who are facing some of these things, it can be really powerful in helping us get better at this thing called marriage, this thing that a lot of us wander into a little bit naively, thinking that how hard can it be? Look how hot he is, right? So in that big 6, one thing that I want to say at the top that I find very interesting, I would have thought this would have made the big 6, and it didn't. Some of you are in marriages in which you guys don't have the same faith perspective. And as a girl who was raised as a church girl, and as a girl who, can you even imagine this? My parents were of completely different faiths. My mother was Church of Christ, and my dad was Baptist. Now, let me tell you, in the denominational world, that was a really big deal. And they did have times that was a really big point of conflict for them because they did see some things differently. But here's what's interesting in my tenure in working with women and working with other marriages is discovery that, do I hope for people to be on the same page with their faith? Yeah, I do. I think it's a point of intimacy that's really powerful. But interestingly, I had couples come through who were not of the same faith by a mile. And yet, because they were willing to engage very Christian principles of honoring each other, of being kind to each other, of being grown-ups, they made it work. That's not to say, believe me, I love it when people are able to walk in lockstep in their faith journeys. But surprisingly, faith was not one of the big conflicts, one of the deal busters that often came up with some of the people that I was interacting with. First one that I dealt with. Who has seen on social media the meme, or who relates to this little vignette I'm about to give you, of a woman saying on a social media meme, we have 45 people coming over in an hour. I asked my husband for help, and this is what he's doing. And he's out, like, I don't know, with a bulldozer digging a trench in the front yard. Have y'all seen this? And how many of you are like, yes, 100%? It's indicative of something that I saw come up time and again. I'm certified in what's called the SINDUS method, which is saving your marriage before it starts. And there's a process you take people through in premarital or even in early marriage. And there were so many things about that assessment and process that are really genius, that are really well done. The one that was like the least sophisticated, but always the showstopper, was an inventory of typical just get your life together tasks. Take out the trash, run the laundry, sweep the floors, and asking a couple to intentionally and deliberately identify who was going to do what pre-marriage. Now, there were couples that kind of had it figured out ahead of time, but there were a lot of couples that we had to stop and camp on that for a couple of different times to figure out what that was going to be. I can tell you that is something that in the premarital counseling that Mike and I did before we got married never came up. Division of labor. It's a big one. It is probably one of the leading ones that I see create all kinds of chaos in a marriage today. Now, part of this goes back to where we are in marriages today, because there are many of you who are, yes, managing the home front the very best you can, managing the kids, but you're also working a little side gig over here, or you're working full time, but you're doing it from home and you are trying to create what you can with your kids, or you're working one shift, he's working the other, he's coming back into the home, you're both trying to manage. It is a new world when it comes to the level of division of labor. The other thing we've done to ourselves, our houses are bigger than they've ever been historically. It does not take long to sweep a one-bedroom cabin, right? It takes longer to clean up your average 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. Our wardrobes. I can remember my grandmother talking about she had her 3 dresses, her house dress that she wore every other day, the other house dress she wore on the other days, and her Sunday dress. That was laundry. Laundry was hard to do, but you had this many items that you were laundrying. And we, chief among sinners am I, had 27 pair of boots we're just trying to figure out where to store on a given day. We have vehicles. We have complex household systems. I bought an appliance, which from what I can tell is actually a blender, but it's called a Ninja Creamy to make ice cream. And the first time the kids ran it, I was like, it's a blender. And they're like, no, it's not. It's an ice cream machine. I'm like, no, it's not. You put all this stuff in a container, you put it in a freezer, you freeze it, you attach it to this little mini, very expensive blender, and then it's like it looks like ice. It's a blender. But we do this to ourselves over and over. We have all kinds of redundancies. We have all kinds of things to take care of. And guess what? For a lot of us, particularly if you're in a season of staying home with your kids, you're the person getting to manage all that. And guess how mad you are? Oh, you big mad. You big mad. Because I hear you. And I hear when people come in and talk about this, how significant an issue this is. For those of you who are the ones primarily managing your home, you likely know the statistics and the numbers. If you were to pay someone to come in and do everything you do, your salary would be in the $100,000 to $125,000 range. You also are probably very aware that at whatever point you re-enter the workforce, the paid workforce, you're going to be behind potentially because you're going to show a gap in your resume. The only way that we move through this point of conflict is to have real conversations about everything that's on each of your lists. Because I'm telling you, one of the enemies in your marriage is making each of you feel unrecognized for all that you contribute, trying to defend the contributions you're making, and getting you in conflict with your partner about that. Instead of saying, this is everything that needs to be done to run this family. How are we going to divide that up? As grown-ups, how are we going to talk about this? A great resource for you to consider is a book called Fair Play. There's also a card game that you can play with it. You can find it online. I don't have any affiliation or association to it. It's just a great tool to begin that conversation. And it's one that I think a lot of times, particularly in female circles, we're not talking about enough, and we're not talking about it in circles of faith. And that is problematic. You weren't designed to handle everything and raise kids and hold on to part-time. It is a co-effort. We are to work together in marriage, not against each other. We are to serve each other and help each other, but it's to be together. And you can't know what that is until you inventory what is actually necessary to make this family run. Sometimes people make radical decisions on this. They get rid of a lot of the toys because who's going to run that? My husband and I had this conversation about some things we'd like to do in the backyard and on and on. And then I've said, question, who's going to be in charge of making sure that the jacuzzi is not a Legionnaire's petri dish. Should we put this in? And it stopped both of us because both of us are like, I don't have time on my plate. Do you have time? Do we have budget to pay somebody to come do some of these things? Maybe the house is too big. Maybe you don't need a boat. Maybe you don't even need a Ninja Creamy. Get realistic, spreadsheet it out. I know it's not romantic. It may be one of the most romantic things you can do in your relationship, to be realistic about the maintenance of your daily life. Second big of the big six, not knowing the difference between fighting and conflict. You probably have heard a lot out there these days about attachment style. I think this comes into play when we talk about if we're fighting or if we're having conflict. Now, I was in a situation in which I do think there's value when you disagree and you're honest about what you disagree in, and even when it gets a little passionate and your gestures get big. My husband was raised in a house with two of the most precious people ever in the whole world. If you've ever heard me speak or write before, you know how much I esteem my in-laws. I miss them so much. They're both now home with the Lord. They were elementary school principals, and they're exactly who you would want to be your kid's educator. My mother-in-law had the most perfect bubble penmanship you've ever seen, ever. And they both talked like this. Sherry, I feel you might be becoming a little frustrated with this. Linda, that's so perceptive. I am feeling a little, could we, da-da-da-da-da. That's what my husband was raised in, which he interpreted as my parents never had conflict. I was raised in a slamming doors, silent treatment, loud voices kind of environment, which was also a very honest environment, which was part of what I really valued in it. And I loved watching my in-laws because it was all very sweet, but there were times I was like, somebody just say, hey, I'm ticked. It was all so crafted and beautiful. And then I'm on this other side, having watched the tumult, and both of these marriages went the distance and went over 50 years. Mike, in that sense, was extremely conflict avoidant. I, on the other hand, was a crow fighting. There is a difference, and I did not understand it for years and years, and neither did Mike, between fighting and conflict. Fighting is the no holds barred, say anything. Yeah, you're probably being honest, but you're probably being mean. Conflict is there's an issue. This issue needs to be resolved. We may each feel pretty passionately about this issue, but the issue is the conflict. It doesn't have to be between the two of us. Let's identify what the issue is and tackle it. And sometimes the tackling of that may have strong emotions, may have big feelings, but this is the conflict, not this. It's a top distinction because sometimes that person feels like they're the issue. And sometimes that person is the issue. I'm not saying that doesn't ever happen. But often what I found in these big six when I would be working with people or even in my own relationship is confusing this with this. Conflict can be a really great thing. Conflict is hard for us because of our attachment styles. There's an author named Sue Johnson. There's a book called Hold Me Tight, another resource I want you to write down under Fair Play. Again, no affiliation. I don't get anything out of it. I'm saying it's a great resource. Many of us, we have avoidant attachment styles. We kind of keep people at an arm's length. And fighting kind of threatens to drag us in. And we just don't really want to see the problems. We don't want to really talk about the issues. And it's not really our deal. And we can be avoidant in that situation. We can take our attachment style and apply it to how we see conflict and fighting and all the rest. Others of us are anxiously attached. Are you mad? 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 Or if I'm not feeling big feelings, even feelings that can be tough, then I don't feel quite as attached. Will you educate yourself about your attachment style and your spouse's attachment style and how you each tackle things that are challenges It's going to equip you to understand sometimes why, yeah, this guy's not a Martian. Okay. I can understand better why he's handling something the way he is. Okay, I'm not a complete weirdo. But not complete. Because I understand that my attachment style often has me responding in this way, XYZ. Equip yourself with understanding, not diagnosing, understanding where you come from and where your partner comes from, and get clear the difference for you in your relationship, the difference between fighting and addressing conflict. Big gap, big difference.
Alrighty, that's part one. We covered a couple of big things that I've seen when it comes to being really intentional about your marriage, being careful with your marriage, understanding some of the things that can come against your marriage. And in the next episode, part two, we will cover the next 4 of the big 6. As always, I encourage you to go to the show notes. Rebecca puts those together. You can see a transcript of all of this. If you're wondering, what's that resource that Julie mentioned? You can find that in the show notes. So be sure and check that out. AllMomDoes.com, AllMomDoes on the socials, a great community for you to check out. And I'm usually on Instagram. I'd love for you to come over and say hi. Julie Lyles Carr over there at Instagram. DM me with topics that you'd like to hear more about, things that you want to talk about and hear addressed. That is so helpful for us as a team to know right where you're at, where your heart's at. So I would just love it if you would pop over, drop me a line, ask me a question, whatever. And I will see you next time for part 2 of Marriage, the Big 6 on the AllMomDoes podcast.